So our second snippet for this week looks at the Republican nominating race in 2008, which was kind of overshadowed by two factors. The first was this chart that George W. Bush's job approval rating was basically collapsing throughout his second term, around 30% by mid 2006. Down in the 20s in 2007 and 2008. So whoever the Republicans were going to nominate had to distinguish themselves from Bush in some way. And then the second were the kind of very odd ideological evolution of John McCain. Remember, McCain had almost beaten Bush, or not almost beaten Bush, but had launched a fairly serious challenge to Bush in the 2000 primary. In the aftermath of this, McCain resisted Bush frequently in Bush's first term. This is him with Russ Feingold, the former Democratic senator from Wisconsin. They were co-sponsoring a bill called McCain-Feingold, a campaign finance bill designed to limit the power of outside interests, large corporate PACs and labor PACs in congressional elections. McCain voted against Bush's tax cuts twice. He sharply criticized Bush. There was some talk, in fact, that John Kerry in 2004 wanted McCain as his running mate. McCain says he's not interested. And in the aftermath of the 2004 campaign, McCain then shifts to the back to the right, especially on Iraq, where he, along with Lindsey Graham, who's still in the Senate, and Joe Lieberman, the former Democratic vice presidential nominee from 2000, emerge as the Senate's chief backers of the war in Iraq as the war is getting more and more unpopular. So McCain is a kind of weird front runner in 2007, and that he's associated with a very unpopular cause, the war in Iraq, and had also criticized Bush frequently in a party where Bush was still fairly popular. McCain brings initially onto his team all of his key advisors from 2000, but he's unable to revive his promise. And in middle of 2007, he fires most of his campaign staff. He's basically out of money. It looks like he's dead in the water. And at this point, a new front runner emerges. You can see from the chart, these are the Republican presidential polls in the last 3 months of 2007. And in most of these polls, the front runner was none other than New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani. And Joe Biden, who say what you want one way or the other about Biden, but Biden has a joke about Giuliani, which in some ways does capture, Giuliani's approach in 2008, was that the standard Giuliani sentence was one noun, one verb, and 9/11. It was as if that was the only thing he was running on as this New York City mayor who had stood up to terrorism in the aftermath of 9/11. And here's a Giuliani ad that gives us a pretty clear sense of his approach.
An enemy without borders, hate without boundaries, a people perverted, a religion betrayed, a nuclear power in chaos, madmen bent on creating it, leaders assassinated, democracy attacked, and Osama bin Laden still making threats. In a world where the next crisis is a moment away, America needs a leader who's ready.
I'm Rudy Giuliani, and I approve this message.
Not too much subtlety to that ad. Giuliani had a problem, though. He had been mayor of New York City for 8 years, and even though we now think of him as this kind of cranky right-wing type, as mayor of New York, he was conservative on some issues, especially issues relating to race and policing, but he was liberal on other key social issues, especially abortion rights and gay rights, and those were stances of pro-abortion rights position, a pro-LGBT position, which did not appeal in the Republican Party of 2008. So in a lot of ways, he was a false frontrunner. He was well known. He got a lot of attention in the aftermath of 9/11. But as there was more attention to the full approach of his record, he began to weaken. And then he adopted this truly bizarre strategy as he started to drop in strength, that he wouldn't compete in the first 6 Republican primaries and caucuses, and instead would start his campaign in Florida. And he figured he would do well in Florida because he had all of the New York retirees. But of course, by the time it got to Florida, he was done. With Giuliani fading for a brief period, a different approach emerged within the Republican Party.
An important policy message from Governor Mike Huckabee. My plan to secure the border, 2 words: Chuck Norris.
Mike Huckabee's a lifelong hunter who'll protect our Second Amendment rights.
There's no chin behind Chuck Norris's beard, only another fist.
Mike Huckabee wants to put the IRS out of business.
When Chuck Norris does a push-up, he isn't lifting himself up. He's pushing the earth down.
Mike's a principled, authentic conservative.
Chuck Norris doesn't endorse. He tells America how it's going to be. I'm Mike Huckabee, and I approve this message. So did Chuck.
Chuck Norris approved.
Again, there's not much subtlety there. Huckabee was the former governor of Arkansas, runs this kind of simplistic right-wing populist campaign. He does very well with evangelical Christians. He was very close to the evangelical community in Arkansas, and he wins the Iowa caucuses in a fairly significant victory over former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney, and a distant third and fourth were Fred Thompson and John McCain. Huckabee's problem is that this kind of appeal, based on evangelical Christians and this kind of simplistic, Chuck Norris is going to solve our problems, doesn't have enough support within the Republican primary process as it moves to the Northeast and to the far West. So in the end, the race comes down to a battle between Romney and McCain. And Romney is someone who had a lot of strengths. He was governor of Massachusetts. He was a businessman. He had helped rescue the Salt Lake City Olympics when they had financial problems. But Romney's problem really throughout his political career is that there never was a sense that there was a core set of beliefs with Romney. And for whatever reason, Romney chose to run in 2008 as a hardline conservative, which is something he just clearly was not. And you get a sense of it from this campaign commercial.
The National Review had it right.
Senator McCain is a hero and a strong supporter of the war in Iraq.
But McCain is not as conservative as Romney.
He opposed the Bush tax cuts twice.
His campaign finance law limits free speech.
He pushed a plan to keep illegal immigrants here permanently.
Mitt Romney, a full-spectrum conservative.
A supporter of limited government.
The preservation of marriage.
And a foreign policy based on the national interest.
I'm Mitt Romney, and I approve this message.
It's worth remembering this ad for when we move ahead to next week, when we will encounter Romney again, but this time running for president in 2012 as a kind of moderate pro-business Republican and as the least conservative of the major figures within the field. Romney was always ideologically flexible. In the end, Romney's lack of authenticity dooms him. McCain is sort of the last man standing, comes back, wins the New Hampshire primary, which pretty much eliminates Romney, and then defeats Huckabee in South Carolina, and ultimately emerges as the consensus, if not the terribly exciting nominee. McCain carries all the states that are in green on this map, basically the more moderate states. Romney carries the states that are in yellow. Huckabee carries the states in blue. And so even though the party isn't terribly excited about McCain, ultimately they choose him for the nominee. So our next snippet is going to look at how this all plays out once we get to the general election.